18 epic war movie battles, ranked not by explosions or body count but by historical accuracy. Some of these are legendary but get the facts totally wrong. Others hired actual veterans, used real planes, and nailed every tactic down to the last bayonet. Let's see who got it right. Braveheart is one of those movies everyone's seen, or at least they know Mel Gibson in blue face paint. But historically, the real Battle of Stirling Bridge went down a lot differently. In real life, William Wallace and Andrew Moray didn't just charge at the English. They set up an ambush as the English tried to cross the narrow Stirling Bridge. The Scots waited, let half the English army cross, then trapped them with a Schiltron formation and basically drove them into the water. In the movie, there's no bridge at all. The armies just sprinted each other across an open field, no strategy at all, and just start brawling. According to Professor Tony Pollard from the University of Glasgow, they're running so fast into each other they hit and double somersault over the head. That's not how medieval battles would have been carried out. What you'd need is discipline and coordinated movements. And even the costumes are all wrong. The tartans, the face paint, all that is just complete fiction. Both sides would have been dressed very similarly. We have no evidence of tartan existing at the time, and face paint is just nonsense. The Last of the Mohicans covers the siege at Fort William Henry during the French and Indian War. 6,000 French soldiers and 2,000 Native Americans take on a British fort. The British surrender, expecting safe passage, but then there's a massacre. The movie nails the look and the scale of the siege, but it takes a lot of liberties with what happened next. The real massacre was brutal. The native forces raided the fort, even scalping the sick and wounded, but the movie skips over that and goes straight to a dramatic forest ambush. That part really did happen, but the movie turns it into a huge, emotional set piece. Dr. David Starbuck, a historical archaeologist, says it really was a one-sided attack. The British prisoners had no weapons. He also calls the scene where a Huron warrior rips out the British colonel's heart absolutely ludicrous. In real life, Colonel Monroe was actually in the French camp, being wined and dined by Marquis de Montcalm. There's even some weapons nitpicking. To have our hero running along, shooting his musket from the hip would not enable him to hit the side of a barn, says Dr. Starbuck. The Patriot is basically Mel Gibson giving the American War of Independence the Braveheart treatment. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. He sticks it to the English, rewrites history, and goes full Hollywood with it. The movie is famous for blasting a cannon through historical fact, including some really bad retconning around slavery. It got to the point even Spike Lee called it pure, blatant American Hollywood propaganda and a complete whitewashing of history. The big set piece in the film is based on the Battle of Cowpens in 1781, though they never name it outright. Gibson's character is a mix of several real-life figures, mainly Daniel Morgan and Francis Marion. There's a key scene where he tells his militia to shoot twice and then retreat. That's actually what happened at Cowpens. The British 71st Regiment Scottish Highlanders tried to charge in with bayonets, and the Continentals pulled back, turned, and fired. Professor Lawrence Babbitts, who literally wrote the book on Cowpens and even did a cameo in the movie, said the Continentals turned faced and fired, and the 71st was devastated. That's sort of the ambush you see in the movie. He also points out that the costumes and weapons were pretty close, but for all the accuracy in uniforms, the film spends 3 hours dodging or outright ignoring slavery. Enemy at the Gates is about the Battle of Stalingrad, easily the biggest and bloodiest battle of the Second World War. The Germans tried to take the city, it turned into rubble, and about 2 million people were either killed, captured, or wounded. In the movie, Jude Law plays the Russian sniper Vasily Zaitsev, and Ed Harris is his German counterpart. They end up locked in a sniper duel right in the middle of the battle. The opening tries to go full Saving Private Ryan, with Red Army soldiers getting ferried across the Volga under heavy fire. Bodies everywhere. That's not actually far off. Soldiers and supplies really were sent over the river, and sometimes guys went into combat with no training, no rifle, nothing. John Delaney from the Imperial War Museum summed it up. Units were sent into combat without training. It was like, here's a uniform, get in it, off you go. The hundreds of thousands of people the Soviet Union had allowed them to treat that resource in a cavalier fashion. If they got killed, there was always another 100,000. Vasily Zaitsev was a real sniper, but the legendary duel at the center of the movie is just propaganda, created to keep morale up. Also, if you're expecting authentic Russian, everyone here speaks in perfect British accents, so historical accuracy is already out the window. Called Hacksaw Ridge. The story's true. Andrew Garfield plays Desmond Doss, a medic who refuses to carry a gun for religious reasons. This is the story of the Dunkirk evacuation, late May to early June 1940. The Allies are trapped on the beach, German forces closing in, and the whole movie's about the desperate attempt to rescue 400,000 soldiers. Christopher Nolan's behind the camera. Mark Rylance pilots a tiny boat, Tom Hardy shoots down planes, and the movie jumps back and forth in time. But for all the talk about realism, there are a bunch of mistakes. Historian Andrew Roberts points out Tom Hardy's Spitfire flies way too low, chews through ammo like it's infinite, and somehow glides around for 15 minutes after running out of fuel, something that just wouldn't happen. A plane like that would drop out of the sky. It wouldn't glide around shooting down bombers. The movie puts the focus on small civilian boats doing the rescue, when in reality 39 destroyers and a cruiser handled most of the work. It also shows French soldiers being turned away from British ships, which wasn't how it happened. The evacuation was a joint Anglo-French effort. Black Hawk Down is about the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. A U.S. Task Force Ranger mission tries to grab 2 Somali warlords, but it goes sideways fast and turns into a 2-day firefight in the city. 2 American helicopters get shot down, 18 U.S. soldiers are killed, and so are hundreds of Somalis. Ridley Scott basically gives you 90 minutes of straight-up gunfire. It looks good, cinematic for sure, but the violence is pushed all the way. Still, for the most part, what happens on screen is close to what really went down, and if you read Mark Bowden's book, the movie sticks surprisingly close to his reporting. It's considered one of the best war movies ever made. Tarantino called it the best movie of the 21st century recently. But Black Hawk Down does have a perspective problem. The film got hit for how it portrays the Somalis. Basically, everyone on the other side is the baddie. And the movie cuts out the Malaysian and Pakistani troops who were part of the rescue and actually died doing it. Gallipoli covers the charge at the neck in August 1915. Part of the bigger Gallipoli campaign where the Allies tried to take Constantinople in World War I. Hundreds of Australians climb out of the trenches and run straight into Ottoman machine gun fire. Mel Gibson's in this. He's still really young here, way before Braveheart, and he spends most of the film running messages between the trenches and command. But when the order finally comes down to call off the attack, he's too late, and the soldiers go over the top anyway. There's some real history in here. Lieutenant Colonel Noel Brazier from the 10th Light Horse really did try to go back and forth between commanders trying to stop the assault, but delays, confusion, and outright bad decisions led to a pointless slaughter. The movie actually tones down how bad things were in those trenches. Rotting bodies, swarms of flies, constant dysentery, the conditions were almost unbearable. And it's also the first time you see Mel Gibson start fudging history to take shots at the British. The movie shows the British just hanging out, sipping tea on the beach, while sending the Australians off to die. But as historian Andrew Roberts points out, you'd never know more British soldiers died at Gallipoli than Australians. Gibson's whole career has been built on being Anglophobic. I'm surprised he didn't make Pontius Pilate into an evil Englishman in Passion of the Christ. A Bridge Too Far covers Operation Market Garden, the Allies' failed attempt to push into Germany by taking a series of bridges in September 1944. It was supposed to be a lightning strike. Paratroopers drop in, ground forces link up, and they'd roll right into the Ruhr. But radios didn't work. Paratroopers landed too far away from the key bridge at Arnhem. Units got separated, and the Germans hit back harder than anyone expected. The movie is huge. Basically, every major actor of the time is in it. Dirk Bogarde, Michael Caine, Gene Hackman, Robert Redford, Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins, they're all playing real people who were there. You could nitpick all day about the wrong tanks, parachutes, or uniforms, but what A Bridge Too Far gets right is showing just how many things went wrong at every stage. John Delaney from the Imperial War Museum said, "It follows the build-up and progress as far as it can over 3 hours. It was a several-day operation involving several 100,000 people." But the big myth the movie pushes is that Market Garden could have worked if only the radios had worked or if the paratroopers landed closer. Military historian Saul David calls that out. All relevant points, but none of them would have made a material difference because there were too many things wrong with the plan. We Were Soldiers covers the battle at Ia Drang, which happened in November 1965. This was the first major battle between U.S. and North Vietnamese troops. What started as a search and destroy mission went south fast. About 200 U.S. soldiers ended up stuck defending a landing zone called LZ X-Ray, surrounded by thousands of Vietnamese fighters for almost 2 days straight. It's based on the book by Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, played here by Mel Gibson, and war reporter Joe Galloway. The director, Randall Wallace, made a big deal about getting the details right, which is a big promise if you've seen what he did with Braveheart and Pearl Harbor. But to be fair, the attention to detail in this movie is real. All the weapons are replicas. The uniforms are period correct, even down to the cigarette brands those guys smoked. There's a napalm injury scene that's rough to watch, practically melting flesh, it's so accurate. For most of the film, the events are on point, but near the end it falls into Hollywood mode. Gibson's men win with a bayonet charge, something the U.S. hadn't done since Korea. The truth is, it was firepower and air support that made the difference. What the movie does best is show how gritty and morally complicated Vietnam really was. There's nothing clean about it. This is Oliver Stone going all in on the life of Alexander the Great, focusing on the Battle of Gaugamela. Alexander was massively outnumbered but pulled off a win against Darius III with some impressive battlefield trickery. Stone definitely hero worships Alexander. Colin Farrell plays him as this blonde, almost mythic figure, but skips some pretty big historical moments, like the burning of Persepolis. Historians have hammered the movie not for huge mistakes, but for being a slog to watch. British historian Dan Snow pointed out that Alexander might actually be too faithful to the sources, which just makes it slow. On the other hand, Stone did bring in Robin Lane Fox, one of the top Alexander historians. He even got a cameo in the battle scenes. The film nails the details, the 12-foot spears, the Macedonian battle gear, the crazy desert conditions in Iraq. Even the battle tactics are legit. Alexander splits his troops, creates gaps for Persian chariots, and then surrounds them. He even uses a flanking move to punch right into the middle of Darius's forces, and yeah, Darius runs. The only real historical quibble is the lack of any real Persian presence on screen. All Quiet on the Western Front covers the 100 Days Offensive, the last major series of Allied attacks in the First World War, where the German army gets pushed out of France and Germany. Netflix made this a big awards play. The film sets everything against the armistice negotiations, but what you get is mostly the fighting. Dr. Jonathan Both, who teaches history at Birmingham and literally wrote the book on the Western Front, says the movie actually gets a lot right. German deserters, the breakdown of discipline, hunger, the scale of violence, the horrendous casualties, how young some of these soldiers are, and the use of tanks and airplanes. Yeah, the movie nails those. But then he points out the big flaw. It shows the war as endless bayonet charges into machine gun fire, which was more of a 1915 thing than what was really happening by 1918. That part's not as accurate. The movie even includes a completely unhinged German general who insists on one last attack. Boff says this actually has some basis in reality. There really were some last-minute offensives, even some by the Americans, though by that point most of the German army was too far gone for any kind of heroic last stand. Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944, the bloodiest landing of D-Day. You've got the U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions stuck in a meat grinder against German defenses. Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan dives right into it. The actual plot with Tom Hanks and his squad going off to rescue Matt Damon's character is pure Hollywood. But the opening battle changed the way war movies were filmed. Just seconds in, you're watching soldiers get cut down before they even hit the beach. That opening sequence made Private Ryan the gold standard for realism in war films. But realism isn't always the same as historically accurate. For example, those landing craft should have had British coxswains steering them, not Americans. And on the real Omaha beach, some U.S. troops were trapped at the seawall for hours, not just the 15 minutes you see in the movie. John Delaney at the Imperial War Museum says it's accurate for that unit, on that bit of that beach, on that day. But you can't say that's what D-Day was like, because it wasn't. Omaha Beach is about 3.5 miles long. What's happening at one end of the beach isn't what's happening at the other end. So it's the truth for one corner of the battle, but not the whole picture. The Longest Day is the classic D-Day epic. If you've ever wanted to see the Normandy invasion done with maximum scope, this is the one. They put 7,000 ships, 1,200 planes, and 160,000 troops on screen. John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and Richard Burton headline, and it runs over 3 hours, covering the landing step by step. It's all adapted from Cornelius Ryan's book, and producer Daryl Zanuck went all in on accuracy. There's real people, real conversations, and recreations of the actual landings, including the U.S. Rangers scaling Point du Hoc under fire, which looks just as brutal as you'd imagine. They had technical advisors who were literally there on D-Day. Of course, there are some moments that are just pure movie logic. Like, for example, Robert Mitchum wandering up and down Omaha Beach with a cigar and no gun while bullets are flying. It's a different era of filmmaking. The movie doesn't have the graphic gore of Saving Private Ryan, but there's something about how close it is to the actual events that makes it hit harder. Historian Andrew Roberts said it best. The rule is the older the film, the more accurate it is. They had historical advisors who'd actually been in the conflicts. In those days, they listened to historical advisors, and the audience knew what had genuinely happened. This is the ultimate U-boat movie. It's set during the Battle of the Atlantic. So you're getting the German side, the U-96 hunting Allied convoys, and everything that goes with it. The film is adapted from a novel by Lothar Günther Buchheim, who was actually a war correspondent and spent time on the real U-96. Most of the movie is about the long stretches of nothing, just endless days stuck at sea, the crew losing track of time, and then suddenly it's pure mayhem when the action finally hits. Dr. Axel Niesli, a German naval historian, points out how real that part is. They just went to sea and stayed there for days, weeks, even months, without even seeing a ship or aircraft. Then all of a sudden, they arrive into action. This is one of the highlights of the film. It is completely realistic. Director Wolfgang Petersen used real U-boat veterans as advisors, and they went all out to get the details right, even down to how the submarine was built. There are a few moments they stretched for drama. For example, there's the U-boat's rivets bursting after depth charges, which wouldn't really happen because the boats were fully welded by then. Or there's the sub-diving to 280 meters, which would have crushed it. But the attacks and the feeling of life on board are spot on. To this day, it's the best film about U-boats you can find. Battle of Britain covers July to October 1940, when Hitler tried to crush Britain with the Luftwaffe before his planned invasion. The Royal Air Force managed to hold them off, and the German losses turned out to be unsustainable. The movie actually recreates not just one, but several key battles. The Luftwaffe first targets airfields, then communication centers, and eventually turns to bombing London. The first London bombing was actually a mistake, a real tactical error that gave British airfields a break and probably changed the whole course of the battle. The film also highlights the role of radar. John Delaney at the Imperial War Museum puts it simply, radar was critical. Without it, we would have lost. The Germans didn't have an equivalent. They didn't realize exactly what it was the British were doing with radar in terms of vectoring squadrons very effectively. They brought in real pilots from the actual battle to help stage the dogfights and built up what's basically a small air force of real planes. Most of the British aircraft you see are actual Spitfires and Hurricanes. If you want historical accuracy and real aerial action, it doesn't get much better. Zulu tells the story of the defense at Rorke's Drift, January 1879. After getting wiped out at Isandlwana, a handful of British soldiers end up defending a small mission against thousands of Zulu warriors. Michael Caine and Stanley Baker headlined this one, facing wave after wave. According to historian Saul David, it's unusually accurate. Films always choose drama over historical accuracy, but The Defense of Rorke's Drift is an incredibly dramatic story. It doesn't need manipulation. There are a few creative liberties. Private Hook, played by James Booth, wasn't actually a drunk, and B Company wasn't mostly Welshmen. But the way the Zulus use the horns of buffalo formation is legit. Tora is all about the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Japan's surprise attack destroyed or damaged 18 warships, killed over 2,400 Americans, and changed everything. This one's another big ensemble, but with fewer name stars. What sets it apart is the focus on accuracy. Both sides are represented with Japanese and American directors and technical advisors from both sides, including Minoru Genda, who helped plan the real attack. If you're a stickler for details, you'll spot some differences, like for example American T-6s standing in for Japanese Zeros. But they recreated everything, from the bombs hitting battleships and aircraft, to the devastation on the USS Arizona, to the American pilots who managed to get airborne and fight back. The stunts were so real that some of the crew nearly died filming them. Tora shows the attack as it actually happened. It's still the most historically accurate movie about Pearl Harbor ever made.